Welcome to Survival Mode Disrupted, the podcast for those who are done performing, done people pleasing, and done living life on autopilot. I'm your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and this is where we create disruptive, unapologetic transformations for those who are ready to exit survival mode and reclaim their power. Every episode is your permission slip to burn the rule book, break the cycle, and finally build a life that feels like yours. So let's disrupt everything that's holding you back and start living life on your own terms. Welcome to Survival Mode Disrupted. This is your trigger warning. This podcast contains unfiltered conversations about trauma, abuse, and survival. Discretion is advised. This is not therapy or medical advice, just real people sharing real stories. So please take care of yourself and pause if you need to. If this conversation hits home, grab the book Survival Mode Exit Plan, your raw, unapologetic blueprint to break free. Available now by scanning the QR code or clicking the link in the comments. Hello, 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 and welcome back to Survival Mode Disrupted. I'm your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and today I have Regina with us. Regina, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Regina Hiremath. I am a survivor of childhood abuse and neglect who found myself married to a narcissist, struggled through the marriage for 23 years, finally gained the courage and the strength to walk away and file for divorce. And ever since I filed for divorce, I've been on this incredible trek of finding myself, my strength, my voice. During the time that had filed for divorce, I started a divorce blog and eventually added a private community. I have four other writers that write for me. They're all divorced, and we write on the various topics of divorce, understanding the need to use my voice and help more people. I decided to start doing public speaking, motivational speaking. And so that was quite a bit of a challenge for me. Due to my past, I struggled with a lifelong fear of public speaking. So I went to work right away, ran into a friend who had told me that she was putting together an abuse symposium. And so my face lit up and she asked me, "Would you like to speak?" And I said, "Absolutely." Well, right after we parted ways, I think I started shaking immensely, asking myself, what had I done? What am I doing? I'm not a speaker, but I'm going to work on it. I'm going to get myself together and I'm going to be ready. And the last meeting before the event, I was informed that I was going to be the opening speaker. So, no pressure there, but I got myself together, was very well prepared. There's something about passion, purpose, and preparation. When they align, it's a beautiful thing. That day, I was asked to speak at a women's wellness conference 2 months later. I took the rest of the year off because I wanted to focus on writing my memoir. Um, Took me about a year, and I met this amazing woman at a women's empowerment event who had written 5 books. Since this was my first time out, I wanted to make sure that I brought someone on who could walk me through the process, support me, and give me the push that I needed. So back in October, I published my memoir, Lessons on the Way to One and then coincided, we moved up the launch date for the book to coincide with my keynote speech for a, a fundraising gala for a domestic violence organization that I became aware of, reached out to the founder of the organization, and after working with them for some time, she offered me the keynote speaker position, to which I took a deep breath and then I accepted. During that time, we were preparing for the event. She offered me an executive board seat with them. I also I accepted that as well. So I've just been on this incredible journey of healing myself and advocacy. And just about a month and a half ago, I completed my life coaching certification. So I am incredibly thankful for the power to walk away, because now I get to live this amazing life of helping myself, helping others, traveling, working out, journaling, just I, I- you know, I'm still in shock. Every day I wake up and I'm in shock that I'm living this life. So that's me.
So beautiful. I love that. I am now in the space where I want to speak as well. And I started with sharing my story on podcasts. I was challenged by a coach to do 50 podcasts sharing my story because I recognized when I started my business, my story was actually a huge burden for me. Um, so she recommended that I tell my story 50 times in 6 months, and I thought she was absolutely crazy. Um, but in that 6 months, I end up telling my story 150 times. And I think, as you probably know, sharing our stories often is very healing as well. So tell us about your story.
Okay, so as a child, uh, as early back as I can remember, lived and spent a lot of time with my maternal grandmother. She's my earliest memory of love. She really is. She was there for me. My parents they were challenged. They were very challenged in raising me and had this whole mindset of living their lives and doing whatever made them happy. I was thankful that my grandmother said, "Not my grandbaby." And she took me in, and really cared for me. And I remember before I started kindergarten, we moved out of state together to be near her mother, and we built this brand new home. We were excited as the building process was wrapping up. We were going over there, checking on the process of the home, and eventually the home was completed and we moved in. And it was probably about a year and a half that we were there. And over the time, I began to notice, as a kindergartner and a first grader, that my grandmother was not well. She wasn't well. She was in and out of the hospital. People were coming into the home to pray for her. And as a small child, this was all very confusing to me because I had no idea what was going on. And about halfway through first grade, she passed away from cancer. And that was the first time that I was made aware of what what had been happening for the last year and a half. Um, After the services, I lived next door with my great grandmother. And at the end of the school year, which was just a few months later, the family came together and decided that it was time for my mom to step up and take care of me. And so over the summer, I moved back out of state with my mom and was just unaware of, at the age of 7, 8, was unaware of the challenges that my mom was facing in terms of providing a safe and stable environment for me. And that year was intense and really rough. And I suffered abuse in every way during that year at the hands of my mother and other people who were around. At one point, we lost our apartment, and we had to move in with some of her coworkers. And the kids in that house were just abusive. They clearly had been through a lot. And so they were putting me through a lot. And it was not long after that that my mom lost custody of me. And I was in the hospital. I then came out. I was living with my paternal grandparents until the court case uh, was complete. At that time, my grandmother's sister stepped up to take care of me. And I knew her, had spent a little time around her. She was interesting. Once the case was settled, I then moved back out of state into the home that my grandmother built with my aunt, was my great aunt, only to discover that she was an alcoholic. And that led to 10 very rough years of abuse and neglect. And I came into early, my late teenage years, having struggled quite a bit, having lots of challenges, have difficulty with focusing for school. And then when I was 17, I ran away and camped out with a friend while I could figure out where to go. Decided to move out of state with my mom, who had relocated to California during that time. And not a whole lot changed. Not a whole lot changed. But at least at that point, I had some freedom and not so much chaos. But I was very, very damaged little girl, very damaged teenager, and struggled through my early adulthood, entertaining relationships and friendships that were even more chaotic. So I was just adding trauma on top of trauma. So when I was in my mid 20s, I met someone that I thought was the love of my life. We got married, and I later discovered many years later that he was narcissistic because we didn't have a term for it in the 90s or the 2000s or the 2010s. 23 years of very difficult marriage, lost my love for life, um, but was successful business wise. During that time, I owned a salon. I life coached other people, brought other people through the industry, launched their careers, all the while I was struggling and falling apart. And eventually we moved out of state and relocated. And that was when things got really bad because he didn't want me to work. He wanted to strip me of my power. I'd been a business owner for so many years, and that was a great um, sense of accomplishment and pride for me. And what I now know is that when someone is attempting to strip away your power, um, they want to isolate you. They want to break down everything that gives you confidence and makes you who you are. And so during that time, that we relocated. We had 3 children. I was struggling terribly. And I remember one day I was unloading the dishwasher. My mom was over visiting, and I just began to throw dishes everywhere. And my mom was looking at me, trying to figure out what was going on. Eventually, we ended up on the floor with her holding me, and me finally opening up and telling someone what was really going on. And that was the beginning, because I sought therapy at that point and began to put my life back together. I filed for divorce. He begged me to stay. I insisted we see a psychologist. We went through 4 to 5 years of therapy. At that point, I realized that this was not getting any better, and that if I turned 50, huge milestone for me. I was just really struggling with wanting to keep my family together, but also needing to free myself to live for once in my life. And I fought hard. I went back to work and got my ducks in a row and filed for divorce again. And I've not looked back. And it's only been up from there.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. You raised some really amazing points during that process. One that stood out to me was that you were suffering silently for years, but you managed to build a business, you managed to help other people with their careers. And what I see oftentimes is women, particularly who are suffering or going through survival mode, they are able to compartmentalize quite well the unease in their life and thrive in one particular area. It's almost as if all of their energy and focus goes away from the problem state and
Right.
goes into a space in which they have full control. So I've seen it. I even experienced that with my bouts of survival mode. There were times where, I went back to school, I managed to get a full scholarship, I was thriving on the outside. So when I then admitted openly to other people that, like, no, my personal life is an absolute shambles, it was shocking. And I think that's one of the interesting dualities of survival mode. It's not like depression, where you are completely um,
Yes.
stripped of your motivation and your desire to move forward. Like, you have that, but you are still dealing with severe things to that create this autopilot for you in that area of life. Um, but you're able to thrive in others. And then the other thing that you talked about that I think is very interesting to bring up is the breaking down of your self-esteem in your abusive relationship. I don't think many people recognize, and I don't know if there was any physical abuse for you, but I don't think people really recognize the intensity of abuse in the fact that it's not like they immediately come into this space where they're overtly nasty or, immediately calling names. It's systemic
Subtle. And it's
and
subtle.
subtle in
Yes.
the
It's
way that it happens, where eventually, when you are in these very raw states of abuse, you have been broken down so that they have control.
absolutely. Absolutely. I usually, when I speak about the abuse that I suffered, I call it the quiet side of DV. It was financial, verbal, and emotional.
Mhm.
And the physical part of it for me was subtle. It was tapping me on my forehead as if to imply that I was stupid, or placing a hand on my shoulder to control me. It wasn't the typical physical abuse that, most people think of when they think of domestic violence. So that's what made it so challenging for me to even understand. I'd been divorced for over a year before I realized I had been a DV victim.
Mm. That it's interesting. I've spoken about this previously. I didn't recognize the patterns that I had continuously uh demonstrated in relationships until I started writing my memoir. And this is over a course of 20 plus years. I did not see parallels initially because I went from a highly controlling and physically abusive relationship to a financially abusive relationship, and then I would say to an emotionally abusive relationship. So for me, each relationship got better,
Right.
but I was still being abused, and I could not see that until I wrote my memoir. And I think oftentimes, we exit situations and they say hindsight is 2020. That's when we're actually, I put up with a lot there. I dealt with a lot. And it's we tend to be in autopilot when we are going through survival mode. So it's not necessarily this reconciliation along the way. It's usually when we've had time to catch ourselves and start actually thriving, that we see how far away we were from where we are currently,
Right.
and then are able to start drawing parallels.
Absolutely. I can relate to that because when I wrote my memoir and in the beginning, near the beginning of the book, I talk about how the process of writing the book was like looking at my life much in the way you look at a spider web, how it's all interconnected, and all the decisions I made and all the trauma that happened to me created this perfect storm for me to walk this path. And had it not been for the process of writing the book, I don't know that I would have been able to fully conceptualize my life in such a way that I could see how I got here.
Hmm.
And I'm
It's
grateful
interesting.
for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can relate to that. How would you describe survival mode?
Survival mode for me, like I said, I was working super, super hard, but I was also making excuses. I had boils, I had upset stomach, I was tired all the time. I was just and really I felt old. I felt really old for my age at the time when I was in my 30s and 40s because I was under so much stress, but masking it and taking stuff for my upset stomach and trying to sleep and rest. But how do you do that when you have all of this stuff jumping around in your head? And when you're dealing with someone who is like the way that I described it in the book, it's like if you've ever been to the beach and you've been walking on large rocks and boulders, you're so focused on not falling and taking each step, trying not to fall. Plant your foot. I think I'm okay. You slide a bit. You, you brace yourself. So the whole time you're doing that, You have no idea what's going on around you. And that's what it was like for me to live with a narcissist. I was so focused on just what my next move would be, how to keep the peace, how to live, how to go to work, how to take care of the house, the kids, that I just could not see anything else going on around me. So it was like I was a hostage.
Mm,
I felt like a hostage because the
mm,
minute I got out, it was during COVID. And here I was flying around the city, living life, meeting people, and just like doing all kinds of things. But survival mode is very, very limiting, restrictive, um, but also necessary. It's a very necessary part of the process because you do have to somewhat keep going until you can figure out that I need to get out,
mhm.
you know?
Survival mode, particularly when abuse is present, because sometimes survival mode is, it could be just your cortisol levels being elevated for an extended period of time. But when abuse is present, or when there is severe trauma, um, it protects us. It is who we become to protect ourselves. And
Absolutely.
I tell people that I work with and the people who listen to this podcast, they've heard me say this 100 times. I think there are three phases to accident survival mode for good. One is self-awareness. The second one is the reprogramming our mindset. And then that third part is reinvention. And you spoke about the reinvention part at the very beginning when you introduced yourself and how, you were stepping out of your norm and doing these things that you never saw yourself doing. What is there any part of you though that misses the woman you were when you were surviving?
No, no, because she was limited. She was, well, I take that back because I've actually brought her along with me.
Mm,
I brought her along with me because she's going to help me get through everything that I need to get through. I don't miss the bad parts of it, but I do appreciate the resilience, the resiliency, and the tenacity and the just strong natured person that she was because everything that she survived at that time um, became building blocks for everything that she's doing now and that she's going to continue to do.
I love that answer. And
Mm.
I resonate with it in the sense that I don't miss the woman I became to survive, but I respect the hell out of her because of how she stormed through her adversities. It wasn't, there was never a foreseeable opportunity to give up. So I had to pull up my socks and stomp my way through the adversities that I experienced. And as a result of that, I have become a woman who has fortitude that I don't think I would have had it not been for what I experienced. And for that, I'm grateful.
And absolutely relate to that. I
Mhm.
can't trade any of my past traumas and experiences because they've shaped me into who I am today. So I definitely can relate.
And most people that I talk to, most people who particularly have dealt with abuse, there isn't this, I wish it never happened. It's it's it happened, and I'm grateful that I'm here where I am today. There's always this level of gratitude because had that not happened, I don't know who I would be. You know what I
Right.
mean? But I
Yeah.
I love who I am today.
Yes. In spite of.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's so freeing in itself, especially when you come from a state where your self-esteem is reduced, your self-worth is almost non-existent. It is questionable sometimes whether or not we even love ourselves in these states. But then to be a woman or women who actively give back, who actively share our stories so that others don't suffer in the manner that we did, it's just so beautiful. And I- that's one of the reasons why I appreciate these stories, because most people have journeyed through how. And what comes out of this is a desire to be impactful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like you come out of the fire, and fire is often used to, when you think of pottery and certain metals and things and diamonds, they have to go through the fire to become the precious object that they are.
Mhm.
So I liken myself to those precious items that go through the heat.
You were
Extreme.
forged by fire.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes, yes, yes. So, Regina, how can the audience connect with you?
Well, I have my divorce blog, Alamonia Life, ALIMONIALIFE.com. There you will find the blog post, the founders page, the page with my book, and my social media links.
Okay. And all of that will be in the show notes. Before we wrap it up, Regina, what is one key takeaway that you have for the listeners today?
One key takeaway would be that, I'm incredibly grateful. I'm just incredibly grateful that I survived that period of my life, and that the very strength that I use to get from day to day, because you only need to make it through 24 hours at a time, as we
Mm-hmm.
very well know. When you're living in trauma, it's just, can I get from one day to the next? And that becomes of such, when you do that and when you survive and you sit in your life and say, I've got to make a change, the most difficult challenge is to say yes to moving on.
Mm-hmm.
That is the most difficult challenge in a person's life who has been beaten down and pushed to the margins. Um, just say yes and just know that everything you need is already inside of you. And what you don't have, people line up in your path to provide it for you. So don't worry about where, when, how, or why. Just say yes. Pick up your foot and move and watch the path line up for you.
That's a beautiful, beautiful takeaway. And Regina, thank you so much for your time. I have enjoyed this conversation. And listeners, I want to remind you, you were not built to break, but you were damn sure not built just to survive. Disrupt the cycle, reclaim your life, and thrive on your own terms. And I will see you